Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we continue our summer of ranking shit. And if you want to stay tapped into that summer, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Today we are continuing going through the NBA positions and giving our top 10s. So we will be ranking the top 10 shooting guards in the league today. And this one is a little bit tricky, Logan, partly just because positions don't exist like this in the NBA anymore. And so there's some where it's like, do you consider that guy a shooting guard? You probably just consider him a wing or a guard. But we classified these guys by position as best we could. Before we get in to the top 10 itself, Logan, who was your toughest cut from this list?
I think my toughest cut was Ant Simons because of how great Ant Simons is offensively, man. And that was one of the big dilemmas with this list overall, Carson, is there's so many different archetypes on the wing. It's just hard figuring out the balance. Do I want this guy who can singularly raise my offensive, floor, or would I rather have, a role player who can do a bunch of little things and defend and shoot at a really high level? And that's one of the biggest themes of this list and one of my biggest dilemmas throughout this one. There's a lot of offensive-oriented guards that I left off of my list, and Ant Simons is the best of that bunch. Limited two-way value, but he is one of the better offensive guards on this list. Mm-hmm. I struggled leaving him off. Again, man, it's that balance. Do I want a complete player? Would I rather have a guy that's just more offensively inclined? I leaned on the more well-rounded guys, but I wanted to get him, man. I wanted to get him here, man. He's a special offensive player.
I love Ant Simons, man. I've always loved Ant Simons. He was one of my guys in that 2018 draft, him and Dante DiVincenzo. He is one of my toughest cuts as well. He is one of the most dynamic pure shooters pulling up and excellent off the catch as well in all of basketball. He's quick. He's improved as a playmaker. He's not great there, but he is solid. But he has major limitations defensively, and he still doesn't pressure and score around the rim at the level that you would like from somebody who you're leaning on heavily to produce like a star for you offensively. So he's an incredibly fun watch as a scoring guard. But other players in that archetype, I would argue, who are on my list have either more physical advantages or they're at least more competitive, more passable defensively. I really think that's going to be the biggest struggle for Ant, is finding that backcourt mate who you can pair him with, who is also going to bring some offensive skill because Ant's not carrying your offense from the perimeter, but who can really compensate for his defensive shortcomings. That's why I'm not sure that Portland is going to be the long-term home for him, and he may sort of struggle to find that home. But he's very talented. In a similar sort of mold, I would say Jalen Green was one of my toughest cuts from this list. And he had the absolutely insane stretch towards the end of this regular season where he was just lighting people up and everything was clicking. Everything that you bought into as a prospect. When I thought he was a special scoring prospect. The athleticism, the ball handling, the shot creation, the shot making from beyond the arc was sensational. But after that fantastic stretch, after that win streak that Houston went on ended, over the last 9 games of the season, Jalen Green was 16 points per game on 49% true shooting. Really, really rough. So, unfortunately, I don't think we can say there's been substantial enough improvement at this moment to put him in the top 10, because over the course of the year, he's 20 points per game on 54% true shooting. He's improved defensively. The playmaking is still pretty mediocre, and the shot selection can just be really rough at times, and that's what dings the efficiency to this play. So if you're talking about anybody on the outside of this conversation looking in, he clearly has the most talent to decisively climb up into the top 10 and beyond. It's just going to be a matter of him honing in, becoming a more efficient, complete basketball player, which could happen. He's still very young. Before we move into the top 10, I do want to clarify, Logan, you and I communicated on this beforehand. We do not have J-Dub, Jalen Williams, on this list, which is kind of weird because I do think in many ways he is effectively a 2-guard, but in OKC, he's not. I mean, he was their starting 4 effectively this past year. That's what they listed him as, at least. And now that they have Hartenstein, I guess in OKC, he's a 3. So if you're wondering where he is, he would obviously be up towards the top of this list, but we are not considering him a 2 because OKC is just a different basketball situation where they have so much perimeter talent and positional responsibilities just are different. And also, positions don't exist in the same way that they used to. We're just trying our best here. With that, Logan, who is in your 10 spot?
At number 10, I have the recently traded Dejounte Murray, and it's part of the dilemma that we were just discussing with some of these young dynamic scoring guards, right? I have my issues with Dejounte offensively. I don't think he is the best complementary guard. I don't think he's an elite shooter, and when we're just talking about scoring the basketball, nothing really comes super, super easy to Dejounte. He's really good in transition, but in terms of the half court, there's nothing like that's really easy the way that some of these other young dynamic scoring guards can. But he brings me enough offensively, and then he's not a negative defensively, right? I don't think he is. We talked about this last episode when we were discussing the trade, Carson, the free agency reaction pod. That he hasn't really been consistently engaged here in Atlanta, and I don't really blame him for that. There's not a massive incentive. It's not like the Hawks are a great basketball team, right? Some of that has to do with culturally. Some of that just has to do with buying in. I'm encouraged that in a new situation, he will be rejuvenated and will lock back in on that end. But he's not a complete negative, right? He's got the athletic tools. We've seen this guy defend at a really high level. I don't have questions about him defensively the way I do about a Jalen Green, the way I do about an Ant Simons, the way I do about some of these other guards. There is a gap offensively, I think, between him and a lot of the other guys above him on this list, specifically my guys at number 9 and 8. It's enough to put Dejounte down here, but I also don't want to take him for granted in what he does. He was a really good mid-range shooter last year. He shot 49% there. He shot 48% in the paint non-restricted area. Shot 46% on floaters. Shot 44% on pull-ups. He's improved a lot there, and he's a really good transition scorer, man. I love watching Dejounte there. It's just like his impact on winning, overall. And I think some of his offensive shortcomings limit how effective he can be. Specifically as him as a complimentary guy. Dejounte's offensive impact is maximized when the ball is in his hands. And that's another component that makes this hard too, is right. The last couple years we've seen him playing in a situation that I don't think is most conducive to maximizing his skill set, right? He's playing alongside another really ball-dominant guard in Trae Young when I don't think Dejounte's an off-ball guy. So Dejounte's not the most seamless offensive half-court fit. That's why he is limited from going higher on this list. But I do value his two-way value pretty highly, and that's why I think I have to have him on here above the likes of an Ant Simons, above the likes of a Jalen Green. And that's just right now. I think in a year from now, we could be revisiting this conversation, and those two guys could improve enough to where they might have a case to be on this list at the 10 spot. But for right now, I think Dejounte's got to make my list.
It'll be tough for Ant to climb into that top 10 as much as I love him, just because, boy, he is slight. He's very limited defensively. I did not consider Dejounte a shooting guard, so this is some of the weirdness that we're talking about. The Dejounte-CJ backcourt is interesting in terms of trying to identify who is the one, who is the two, because over the majority of their respective careers, CJ was a 2, playing alongside a great point guard. Dejounte was a 1, playing without high-end backcourt talent in San Antonio. Then you flip their circumstances. Now, CJ is playing in a situation where there isn't another, lead perimeter ball handler. He becomes the 1 in New Orleans, and Dejounte, playing alongside a ball-dominant player, becomes the 2 in Atlanta. I consider CJ the 2 just because he has more of that score-first, shot-making skill set. Dejounte is still more of a playmaking, lead ball-handling guard. Neither of them, to me, is an ideal lead ball handler on a really good offense, but Dejounte has more of that point guard skill set. So I would consider him a 1 and CJ the 2, but I have CJ at number 10. Dejounte, I do think, is the better player of the two, presuming that he taps into the defensive value that he can have. Not to say that he is ever again going to be what he was early in his career in San Antonio. I just think at this stage in his career, he hasn't been that committed to that end of the floor in multiple years. He now has this sort of star mentality and load offensively. I just don't think he's ever reaching that level of value again. But I do think he can be better than he was in Atlanta on a better team defense with better personnel around him. And I think that puts him past CJ as an overall basketball player. But I do think that CJ is the better purely offensive player. And in a lot of ways, CJ just had a career season. It was the most efficient season of his career ever, 59% true shooting. He was the single most efficient pull-up shooter in basketball, Logan, by a lot, in fact. He had an effective field goal percentage of 57 on pull-up jumpers. And the next best of anybody attempting as many pull-up shots per game as him was like 53%. That's a big old gap. He was 45% from mid-range, 43% on pull-up threes, though. And that is where he was just absolutely deadly, and he got smarter about his shot selection as a pull-up shooter as well. He halved his mid-range frequency from the year prior, which makes him significantly more efficient. That's less force, difficult shots, more of those high-value threes compared to tough twos. He was 51% on floaters as well, just an insane shot maker. And that pure shooting makes him a weapon offensively in numerous different ways. It makes him an 87th percentile pick and roll scorer. You get him a screen. He is deadly from floater range, from beyond the arc, from the mid-range, and he's a 95th percentile spot-up player, just an absolute deadeye. So offensively, he balled out throughout the regular season. But in the playoffs, you saw some of his limitations, the biggest being that he is just a below average NBA athlete and he's undersized. So he really struggles to get to the rim. He barely gets there, and when he does, the finishing is brutal. He shot 54% inside the restricted area this past year. He's an average playmaker as well. So although I thought he did a good job of playing smarter offensive basketball, buying into a role, by the way, competing defensively as well as he ever has, and although you could never say that he's a plus on that end, playing hard with good hands, he actually has solid length, 6'6" wingspan. He's always going to be destined to mediocrity because of his size and athletic limitations, but I thought that he was totally passable on that side. But still in the playoffs, 18 points per game on 47% true shooting. That is the frustrating of this entire configuration around Zion. That is where you just wonder, like, what is the ceiling with this team? Dejounte doesn't help that. He doesn't help provide you easy, super efficient offense. He's a below average efficiency scoring guard, although he's improved his three-point volume and efficiency, learned to play off ball a little bit more. He's still not great there, and so you have all of these clunky, not great athletes, not great rim pressurers with CJ McCollum, with Brandon Ingram, with Dejounte, all of whom you are like, okay, how well do they fit away from the ball? How much value are they adding one on top of another? When really, I just think you want to have Zion, awesome wings, one really good lead ball handler. New Orleans doesn't accomplish that with either CJ or Dejounte to me. But either way, Logan, we both have a New Orleans Pelican in the 10 spot.
Yeah, I'm kind of shocked. That's what's so weird about this, man, is I really don't know what positions. You know, I thought about if we just do like a guards, wings, and bigs, but
yeah, but it's more fun. We get to squeeze out more players this way.
Yeah, we get to squeeze out a few more podcasts too, man. I do like it that way. It sucks though, because I mean, I think when we move on to small forward, I mean, I think that position is loaded, and I think we're gonna have to leave off like some really.
This is the weakest. This is gonna be the weakest position
by far.
Because CJ is definitely not a top 50 player, I wouldn't say. He's probably somewhere around 60, 65. And honestly, the next couple guys are both in that same range to me. It is the weakest position at this point because your shooting guard is basically just whatever guard is not good enough normally to be your primary ball handler. It's not a size thing anymore, right? SGA is your point guard because he is your primary ball handler. Luka is your point guard because he's your primary ball handler. So it does make sense because shooting guards normally aren't going to have the same like defensive value of a bigger wing. Ends up being the weakest position. But shout out CJ, man. He had a really good year, and I'm hopeful that next postseason he'll have a better showing because even though I do think bigger athletes can give him trouble, and you absolutely saw that against OKC. Those guys were pestering him, pressuring him, able to affect him with their length. But if he had a better shooting run, if he was better as a difficult shot maker where he normally is so good, he definitely can be better than he was this past season. But those physical limitations are ultimately the reason that I have him down at 10.
Yeah, and I left CJ off my list. I considered him as a. I think that's what's so funny. I think they have two guards. I have CJ and Dejounte as both two guards.
Oh, fair.
CJ would have also been on on my short list off.
That is what's tricky about this list. But when we talk about the J-Dub stuff, that's where, like, I try to look at people within their context and say, okay, if you were to have a position on your team, this is what you would be. Because otherwise, then, like, yeah, I would say, sure, the Pelicans have two guards. The Orlando Magic, you could say, have two guards with Jalen Suggs and KCP. The OKC Thunder have two guards with Dort and J-Dub. It's tough.
One guy who I am certain is a 2 guard and was Carson, I agonized over this one, man. I really don't know if I'm too low. I think I might be too low on this guy. I don't know. At number 9, I have Zach LaVine, man, and he was like the hardest guy to rank on this list because I feel like if you asked people this question a year ago, they probably would have had LaVine in the top 5. They might even had LaVine in like top 3. Like that was his perception across the league, and I think there is. Between LaVine and some of the guys that are above him on this list, I think there's a pretty significant self-creation gap in terms of the shots that LaVine can create for himself and the ball handling and the explosiveness. But I think those guys are better complementary pieces, and I think they're better two-way players. And considering the fact that I don't view a lot of these guys as number ones, bona fide number 1 guys, for most of this list, I leaned on the side of guys that give me better two-way value, that are better complementary pieces. And it sucks because we only saw 25 games of LaVine this last season. He put up 20 points, 5 boards, and 4 assists on 45, 35, 85 splits, 58% true shooting. He shot just 34% on catch-and-shoot attempts. He shot 30% on jumpers. And the most damning stat to me, Carson, was just how significantly better Chicago was once they put Kobe White into the starting lineup and let him get a ton more burn. The Bulls were nearly 5 points per 100 possessions better offensively with LaVine off the court. You know, they had an offensive rating of 111 with LaVine. They had an offensive rating of 116 without him. And so I think that speaks volumes to his value and how he can sometimes be a negative with his style of play. And he doesn't bring you that defensive value. So I agonized over where to put LaVine on this list. I played with him as high as, I think, number 7. But I just don't really view him as the kind of winning, high impact winning asset. I think LaVine can succeed in places. Again, I think that there is an offensive and self-creation gap between him and some of the other guys above him, but I want guys with really high winning impact, and I value being able to space the floor at a high level. I value catch and shooting at a high level, and I really value defense. And LaVine leaves me lacking in a few of those categories, so ultimately I leave him here at number 9.
I had Zach LaVine at number 9. I moved him up to number 8. And just in the interest of transparency, we're recording this early in free agency. So maybe something has happened with Zach LaVine that we don't know about yet, this stupid past version of ourselves. And frankly, I really hope that it has, because I want to see Zach LaVine in another situation. If he stays in Chicago with all of the issues that team has, with just the lack of structure and incentive to play winning basketball, then maybe he belongs lower than this. And I think that there's a lot of stigma surrounding Zach LaVine right now for a number of reasons. He was hurt this past year. He is objectively overpaid. You have to pay him $45 million 3 years from now. And his production does not match his winning impact. This is a guy who has always been an electric talent, a jaw-dropping athlete, a sensational pure shooter. He can give you 25 a night efficiently. And what happens? You look at his on-off numbers and you say, they're better with him off the floor. You go a majority of a season without him out there, and your team plays better basketball without him. And you start to hone in on all of his shortcomings, which are apparent. Defensive engagement, his limitations as a playmaker, at times his shot selection. I understand all of those frustrations with Zach LaVine. I just think he's too talented to be viewed as unfavorably around the league as he is right now, where you're talking about viewing him as like a negative asset. And again, contracts don't factor in to our rankings here. We're just talking about how good a basketball player are you. I'll give you an example. I really debated him and Alex Caruso, who I have in my 9 spot, in a vacuum as basketball players. And that's an interesting conversation. What is inarguable is that I would rather have Alex Caruso on my team because he is a way, way more cost-effective addition. And most contenders also are not looking for the dynamic scoring guard, right? They probably already have that guy to put them in a contending position. They want the perfect role player. That is Alex Caruso. But this sort of reminds me of a conversation we had during our top 10 point guards list about Jrue Holiday versus Jamal Murray. It's different. And the reason it's different is that Jamal Murray, who you had below Jrue Holiday, neither of them were in your top 10, but that's what you said, has proven that he can be the number 2 on a title team, that he can play at a top 15 level over a playoff run, super efficient, phenomenal shot making, high level playmaking. We saw that. But you also see that this past run, although he was hurt, like he really struggled to be the consistent number 2 that you need. And so then you were kind of saying, I would just rather have the consistent, really high level, sort of supercharged role player stuff from Jrue Holiday as maybe a 4th option, because I know that he is going to help impact winning in that role at such a high level. But I do think that that's a privilege. I do think that if you overtask a Jrue Holiday, you see his major shortcomings in recent years. Alex Caruso, you would never even attempt that. He has to be your 4th starter. And Zach LaVine is not like Jamal Murray. He's not. Jamal Murray is way better in terms of being a 2nd option. I don't like your prospects of contending if Zach LaVine is your 2nd option. I would say he definitely has to be your 3rd best overall player. But I do think he can be the 2nd option on a good team if you put him with the right personnel, if you put him in a winning organization, because the talent is undeniable. And this was a down year for him, but it was a small sample size. If we just take the last season and change, including the 2023 season, he's still giving you 23.5 a night and over 4 assists a game on 60% true shooting. And coming into this past season, he'd averaged at least 24 a night on at least 60% true shooting for 3 straight seasons. That's one of the things that I want to emphasize about Zach LaVine. His buddy DeMar actually suffered from some of the same discourse. People look at these guards who put up big numbers or whatever, scoring perimeter players, and if they have limitations as playmakers and as defensive players, they start to say everything about that player is not conducive to winning. They start to just presume, oh, that guy's inefficient, which is not the case with Zach LaVine. If there's one thing Zach LaVine can do at a really high level, it is score the basketball in a number of ways. He's a 79th percentile isolation creator. He was a 76th percentile pick and roll ball handler as a scorer this year in terms of efficiency. And most lethally, which makes me most confident about him translating to a bunch of situations offensively, 92nd percentile spot-up player. Insane off movement, quick release, just an absolute deadeye. He's awesome in transition, one of the most prolific scorers in the league there because he's a great athlete in the open floor. Like, that combination of shooting and athleticism is just very rare. So I know all of his limitations. But the guy has never been in a good basketball situation in his entire career. And he's 29 years old. Like, I don't think we can say that he is past the point of no return. Do I think it's likely that he maximizes his value in all of these ways? No, I don't. But I do think an engaged defensively Zach LaVine, which we haven't seen much of, but we saw it for a little sliver of the season when Lonzo was healthy. He was contributing to a good team defense. Playing in a smarter offensive system, there's just a ceiling there that Alex Caruso, as much as I love the guy, just could not touch. And I do think that LaVine is a more dynamic offensive talent than CJ, and that his athletic advantages do give him an advantage in those playoff environments. I'm not high on the guy, but maybe I'm higher on him than the league is right now, because I just think people are denying the level of basketball talent here and acting like he's somebody who you don't want to touch. And I don't think that that is the case. The contract sucks, but in a vacuum, I don't think that's the case.
I mean, yeah, the Warriors just turned down Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins to get the guy. I mean, I think that should speak volumes. Again, the contract, I think, somebody pointed this out in our chat, and we discussed that the other night, and I think I guess the Warriors just want to get their payroll down. I think that's probably one of their primary focuses and why they don't want to take on LaVine's contract. So, again, I understand it a little bit, but I think they were gaining value with the 2 contracts they were getting off of to acquire LaVine. But I think that speaks volumes. I'm really intrigued, man. Sell me on Caruso. Why does he have to be here?
Interesting. I wonder who you're going to have above him. Caruso is just such a winning basketball player, man. And the Jrue Holiday comparison, to me, is decently apt here, right? Jrue is, of course, a better basketball player. He's a more skilled offensive player. We've seen him carry a heavier load there than Caruso could, but it's certainly not where he's at his best. If you want a guy who is going to be your 4th option offensively, who's going to knock down his spot-up jumpers, who is going to be an active off-ball mover, who's going to cut who's going to push in transition, make good decisions, at times run pick and roll possessions for you, make good reads there, like just do all of the little things, all the complementary things. I could be describing Drew Holiday. I could be describing Alex Caruso. Caruso is a really improved player offensively. That is, to me, the biggest reason that I'm comfortable putting him on this list. Of course, he is still the weakest player offensively. There's no doubt about that, but he's going to bring real positive value to any situation that you could put him in because of everything that I just mentioned. He's an awesome cutter, just had a career shooting season, 40% from deep on 5 attempts per game, really improved there. And when he was entrusted with more ball handling this past season, he was a 72nd percentile pick and roll creator. He's a pretty good pick and roll passer, and he's a phenomenal ball mover. Like, he's just a phenomenal connector. And specifically in OKC, where they play with that sort of pace, when they are constantly attacking in these drive and kick styles, like you want a dude who can knock down a shot, put the ball on the floor, drive, attack and close out, find the open shooter, keep the defense in rotation. Like, Caruso is just a perfect add there. So he's never going to come close in terms of volume, but you don't necessarily have to. And when we're comparing some of these guys who are like going to score with maybe mediocre efficiency, mediocre playmaking, they can give you 20 plus points per game, but not all those guys are more valuable than Alex Caruso. Jalen Green, for example, he's not good enough at that yet. Ant Simons is too much of a glaring defensive negative. Caruso changes the game defensively. Man, he's the best defensive guard in basketball. Awesome screen navigator, insane lateral movement. He sticks with everybody on drives, can apply real pressure with rear view contests, has phenomenal instincts jumping passing lanes, forcing steals. He's an elite shot blocking guard, gave you a block a game this past year, and he's really versatile. Like, you cannot mismatch attack against Alex Caruso. He was an 83rd percentile isolation defender, outstanding, and a 77th percentile post defender. So when strong guards or when bigger wings try to go at him, they struggle. He is an excellent positional defender. He's pretty strong. He's got great hands. And that post defense percentile number holds up year after year. He's athletic. He's physical. His motor does not stop. Like, he is just destructive defensively. So when you can give me that, and then offensively, 10 points per game, 4 rebounds a game, 3.5 assists a game on 61% true shooting, not going to pop off the page at you, but efficient, versatile impact, I would just love to have that guy on my team. So the ceiling with a LaVine is a little bit higher. The floor is also obviously lower if he's not in the right situation. And I'm taking Caruso over CJ just because I think I do have my concerns about CJ's shot quality, shot diet in a playoff environment against a serious athletic physical defense. And I know that I can bank on really high level impact from Caruso. So he is like the most highly regarded role player in this mold to me, but there's several other dudes who weren't far off this list just because I know that I can bank on the defensive value being at an elite level and the offensive value being pretty good, complementary. KCP not far off this list. Jalen Suggs, both of them in that Magic backcourt. I guess Suggs is a point guard now, you would say, but like, he's not far off this list whatsoever. Caruso's the best version of that. He's the most game-changing defensively. I think he's the most versatile offensively because I trust his playmaking so much. I love the guy. I would just want him on my basketball team no matter what.
This is a great take. I didn't even consider Caruso. I think Caruso would be the first guy off my list. I don't think I would make any adjustments to get him here. I think I would probably still have him behind LaVine and Murray, but you could argue in terms of winning impact that it is close. Like, Caruso is that kind of supercharged role player. And my next guy is in that very same mold. A lot of what you were describing, I think, could apply to this guy. Also, bald. At number 8, I have Derrick White.
Whoa.
I think you could have Derrick White higher. And again, White and LaVine to me were the two, this stretch, to me, like the top 6 was almost like a no-brainer to me, but the 7 through 9 spots were tough, and
wow.
I called an audible at the last minute, and I moved Derrick White down 1 spot just because I question, like, again, it's the same thing with Caruso, right? How great can your offense be if this was like your only guy and you were starting out with this team? But all the little things you talk about, Carson, taking on lead guards, defending against wings, being able to switch on to bigs, defending in space, rear view contest, man, defending the pick and roll. Derrick White gives you all of that, man. The guy averaged over a steal a game, over a block a game. And He does all the complementary stuff offensively, running pick and roll for you, being a connecting piece offensively, making great decisions in playmaking. Again, the numbers aren't going to pop off the page to you in comparison to some of these other guys, but he's just damn efficient with everything he does. 15, 4, and 5 on 46, 40, 90 splits with a 61% true shooting. Again, with these numbers, it's important to contextualize that Derrick White plays in probably the most optimized situation for a guy in his role. He has guys who can handle the ball. He has guys who can score. He just needs to do all the little things. Regardless, he shot 74% in the restricted area. He shot 45% on floaters. He shot 42% as a catch and shooter. Like Derrick White in the playoffs, if he caught it and shot it, I was shocked if it didn't go in, man. That guy was absolutely nails the entire run. In comparison to some of the guys who are above him on this list, he is limited as an off-the-dribble shot creator, but you could argue that he is one of the best defenders, if not the best defender, on this entire list, and that's important. And again, man, that's what's so interesting to me about the dynamics of this position, the offensive versus two-way impact dilemma. And I couldn't leave White off the list, but I also just could not put him higher with some of his offensive shortcomings, in my opinion, to some of these other guys. But he's one of the toughest guys to rank on this list, man. I would hear an argument for Derrick White probably all the way up to number 6. But I like your Caruso take, man.
Thanks, man.
I think he would still be number 11 for me, but those are two guys that are in very similar molds. Also, both bald Boston Celtics, man. Believe that.
Logan Camden, known to have claimed that Alex Caruso was a Boston Celtic multiple times because he can't tell bald people apart, which is sad because he himself has been bald for many stretches.
Well,
and maybe right now we'll never know because he never takes that hat off.
Exactly. I'm going to leave that to be just a mystery.
It's one of the great mysteries. Well, Logan, you say that you would hear out a case for Derrick White all the way up to number 6. I've got him at number 5, buddy. And I'm going to be honest, I'm confident in that. I'm comfortable in that. Maybe we have a slightly different definition of who is eligible for this list at the 2-guard spot. I just think you make the comparison to Caruso, and yeah, it is similar in the sense of like, no, these are not dudes who are ever going to score 20 plus points per game for you, like in their current situations especially. Derrick White, though, is much more capable of that than Alex Caruso. He is a significantly better offensive player. And so now it's like, we're not talking about a 10-point-per-game efficient contributor. We're talking about a dude who on any given night could explode for 25, could be your best offensive player in any high-stakes game, and is going to do so with fantastic efficiency. I mean, the guy just averaged 17, 4, and 4 on 62% true shooting in a title run and is clearly by far the second best defender on this list. You mentioned him up against, well, there's another guy who's a really good defender, but I would take Derrick White over him. I think Caruso's one. I think that Derrick White is number 2. An elite point of attack defender. You mentioned all the great things that he does. Best shot blocking guard in the NBA. And then offensively, 40% high volume 3-point shooter and is out of this world as a spot-up player, 95th percentile. You mentioned your confidence every single time. I mean, his release is so quick. He's comfortable shooting against legitimate contests, and he maintains that elite efficiency. He's also an 88th percentile pick and roll creator, and that's where I just think you gotta love Derrick White, man. What he can do for an offense like Boston's in the clutch, running side pick and roll, using Jason Tatum as a screener. Like the shot quality that 2-man game can create is immensely high. What he can do getting to floater range, where he's pretty darn good. What he can do as a pull-up shooter from beyond the arc, where he's pretty darn good. Like, no, he doesn't have the athletic profile. He doesn't have the crazy wiggle and handle of a star guard offensively. But his shot making is insane. His playmaking is really consistently sound, and his defense is elite. When I look at everybody else who I have below him, I either have some questions about their offensive ability as like a top 2 sort of guy, and then they have clear defensive limitations like a CJ McCollum, like a Zach LaVine. I think that Derrick White is a significantly better offensive player than Alex Caruso, and I think my other guy on this list who is sort of in that role player mold, White is a better offensive player and a better defender. There's just not a lot of these like offensively slanted 2 guards who I think actually surpass Derrick White in overall impact. Like if I were building my basketball team will see some of the guys you have above him. But like the gap between a LaVine, the gap between a CJ is large. It is large. And I do not think that that is just because Derrick White is in Boston. I think that he is just a phenomenal winning basketball player. It's great that he doesn't have to take on some sort of outsized offensive load, but you could put him anywhere. He could be the third best player on a really, really awesome basketball team.
That's just what makes it so hard about ranking this list, man. He is an ultimate ceiling raiser. Like Derrick White does all these things that just win you basketball games. I mean, there were so many people throughout these playoffs. Derrick White's been their best player on the Celtics.
First round, he was.
That's just ridiculous. It speaks to the Spurs surplus of talent that they have, but again, it also speaks to how great of a player Derrick White is. I'm really intrigued now. You got me a little perked up, Carson.
Yeah.
At number 7, I have Desmond Bane. Okay. I had to put Bane above White because I just think the offensive gap there is significant enough. I think we saw real growth from Desmond Bane as a ball handler and an off-the-dribble scorer this year. That's one of the things I enjoyed about Memphis this season, with Ja Morant's absence, is that somebody had to step up. And this was an area where Bane was a little bit limited before, and he really grew there. He was an 83rd percentile pick-and-roll scorer as a ball handler. And he is an elite shooter of the basketball, man. 69% in the restricted area, 45% on step-backs, 44% as a catch-and-shooter, 42% out of the mid-range, man, 40% on step-back threes, 38% on pull-ups. Like, the dude's just got a butter-smooth stroke, man. If he's putting it up, you think it's going in, and he can do it off movement, he can do it off the dribble. Again, I think that was a real growth from Desmond Bane this season, and why I'm confident in having him a little bit higher on this list is I think he's grown in that area. And he's not comparable to White or Caruso in terms of, that kind of defense, because you're talking about like the upper echelon, the pinnacle of perimeter defenders in the league. But Bane's also not a negative there. Now, Memphis was statistically worse with Bane defensively on the floor. I don't really hold that against him. Like, Memphis was just bad defensively overall this season. This was not a competitive basketball team. But I think there's enough of an offensive gap there between him and White, just a little bit, to justify him being above him. 24, 4, and 6 this season, 59% true shooting. And, he scored 8 pull-up points per game, man. That was tied 18th in the NBA this season. He's grown there too. There's enough of an offensive gap between Bane and Derrick White to me. But this was one that I called an audible at the last minute, man. I had White above Bane. Right before we started the pod, I moved White down a spot to move Bane up. I really value how great of an offensive player Desmond Bane is. But then I wonder. I just wonder, like, if you put White like in Memphis, if he would put up these numbers too, man. And that's what. It's a situation, because I go Desmond Bane would succeed in Boston the way that Derrick White would, but also would Derrick White just put up the raw numbers that Desmond Bane does? That's what makes these lists tough, man. I don't know. I think there's enough of an offensive gap. That's why I went with Bane above Derrick White. But I agonized over this one. This was one of my toughest decisions on this list.
I think that you hit on the exact point that I was going to make at the end there. I do think that if you put Derrick White in a higher volume role, if you put him in Memphis down a Ja Morant, could he give you 23.5 and 5.5 on 59% true shooting? I think he could come pretty close to that, because when you think about what makes Bane so great as an offensive player, it's the insane pure shooting. 44% off the catch, 35% on pull-ups on a high volume. Pretty darn similar to Derrick White. It is the feel as a pick and roll playmaker and the threat of that pull-up shooting made him an 87th percentile pick and roll scorer. I just mentioned Derrick White was an 88th percentile pick and roll creator. He has those same positive traits. Connective playmaking is a strength for Desmond Bane. He's just very selfless. And when he is running pick and roll, when he did take on a more significant load, if he sees a third defender coming over into a helping position, like, he'll kick that pass over to the wing shooter with anticipation, who they're helping off of. So no, he's not making like crazy skip lob passes, but he can do the basic stuff. So could Derrick White, though. Like, I do think that Bane is a little bit of a crazier shooter. I do think that he is maybe even a little bit more comfortable off movement. He's a little bit bigger. but it's pretty darn close, man. Transition is a place where I would say that Bane has a solid advantage. He's 9th in transition points per game and just consistently excels there. But even if you're losing 10% of the offensive production from Derrick White, I think you are gaining that back and more defensively. I think that Bane is fine there. I do want to give props. I mean, Memphis still posted the number 12 defense in basketball this year. It's not what we're used to, but their issues were much more offensive. Bane is fine defensively. And offensively, I love him. I do still think that there are some limitations that have to be acknowledged. His limitations athletically and creating separation one-on-one are real, and they do limit his efficiency to some extent. The lack of quickness there, like he was a 17th percentile isolation scorer. And so that's where I just think like a lot of the things that he does really well, Derrick White could replicate in that sort of volume. And I will take then the guy who is also an awesome defender, but they're very close. I have them just one spot apart. I have Desmond Bane at number 6 on my list. At number 7, I have Mikal Bridges. And I don't know if he's on your list at all, because this is where the positional stuff gets weird, right? OKC, they kind of have 3 shooting guards. I said 2 earlier. I didn't even mention Alex Caruso there. Caruso, Dort, and J-Dub. The New York Knicks have like several guys who you would normally consider small forwards, but as their roster currently sits, Mikal is going to be their starting 2. And I think that he has a skill set that in many ways is like much more conducive to that than people tend to think, tend to act. Like him and OG and Randall is a super weird fit. I do not necessarily think that that is the case. I think that Mikal, first of all, although he is obviously a taller guy, right? He's 6'6" and he's long as hell with that 7'1" wingspan. He's slight, and he particularly excels at defending guards. And he's not a very good positional rebounder if he's your 3. I think that it makes sense to have him at the 2. So I am listing him here. And it's been an interesting year and a half for Mikal. I almost think it's not even worth mentioning his Brooklyn numbers. Like, obviously, he had the flamethrower end to 2023, and then he came back down to earth this past season. But that was just so clearly not the role for him from the jump. I never felt like that was going to be the role. He's just not that level of shot creator. He's not that level of athlete in terms of the downhill pressure that he can apply. He doesn't have that level of playmaking chops on ball. He is meant to be your dream 3rd option, your dream 4th option, maybe if you're crazy, crazy lucky. But I would say number 3. And that's basically what he was doing for the Suns, right? He was giving you 15 a night on 60% true shooting with elite defense, and everything about his game makes him extremely versatile offensively. He's a 39% catch and shooter from beyond the arc, and at his size, with his length, can get those shots off against a whole lot of levels of contest because of his height. 76th percentile off screens. Fantastic cutting wing. When he was in Phoenix, you could argue the best in the league at that. And I think in New York, in more of an off-ball role again, you will absolutely get that value. And then he brings you pretty decent feel as a connective passer. I think that's an area where he's solid. He makes solid decisions within the flow of an offense. And defensively, that length, that lateral mobility, he is just incredibly difficult to get past. And if you do, again, he has the length to bother you. So this is pretty similar to the Derrick White case. I just think Derrick White can give you more as a ball handler. I think that although Mikal may have outscored Derrick White this past year, that is so situational. Like, I actually have more confidence in Derrick White's self-created offense and his ability to create good shots for others as the ball handler. But I do think there's a lot of similarities between the two of them. They're not going to produce at crazy high volume, but they're going to give you 15 to 18 points per game efficiently and defend their asses off. Here, I think that Bane's offensive advantage is slight enough to have him over Bridges. But I don't think there's a big gap between 5 and 7 here. And generally, again, same thing I was saying for Derrick White, same thing I would say for Caruso compared to a CJ. I am leaning on these guys whose winning impact I'm just extremely confident in compared to some of the higher volume guards who have more questions in terms of defense efficiency, playmaking, what have you.
This is funny to me because this was the toughest stretch of the list with these guys, and I actually have Bridges at number 6. So
interesting.
He's one spot higher. I have him above Bane and Derrick White. The reason being, a lot of what you said about Derrick White in Bridges, I like the comparison. You get a little bit of ball handling, you get all the connective traits, and Bridges, I think you could argue, is just one of the best complementary wings in basketball, period.
Absolutely.
Right? The catch and shooting, the cutting, he brings all the complementary stuff. And I like the fact that he has been in Brooklyn and could hone his skills a little bit. That is a benefit of playing in some of these situations where you just are going to have the ball more. So I think he's grown in a couple of those areas. The reason that I have him above Derrick White, too, I think in a vacuum, right, White might be the better defender. I prefer Bridges' length a little more, right? I think he can take on bigger assignments and not give up as much, right? He can just take on bigger wings. I really value that. His length is really disruptive, and I don't think the offensive gap is massive. I definitely prefer White as a ball handler and as a playmaker, but it's not far. This is the toughest stretch of the list, man. I think he does all the complementary things at such high level that I'll take him. I think White and Bane are definitely better finishers around the rim. I think they're better ball handlers, better decision makers, but it's all marginal. It's really, really close between all these guys. And yeah, I prefer Bridges' length, man. I think he can just take on more versatile defensive assignments, and that's why I prefer him to White and Bane. But by far, Bridges, Bane, and White were the hardest 3 guys to rank on my list, and in some sort of order. The 5 to me was really
Can
concrete.
I add one thing to the Bridges-White debate?
Sure, go for it.
I do not disagree that Mikal Bridges is the more versatile defender. However, I do think that White is pretty solid there, right? He's not an easy guy to attack. We saw that that's what the Mavs had to resort to, trying to have Luka, quote unquote, attack Derrick White. He's still a big 6'4" guard. He's built strong. He has great hands. Mikal does have the ability to be the primary assignment for some of those bigger wings, but I also don't think that's where he's best suited. And in New York, that responsibility is going to go to OG Anunoby when it comes to guarding those big wings, even power forward type of guys. That's where the fit with Julius Randle can be a little bit weirder defensively more than offensively, because you kind of have to try to hide Randle because he's a bit more slow-footed. But I do think that White is still the better overall defender to me because he is simply more elite in terms of positional defense dealing with guards than Mikal is even. I think that offsets the difference in versatility. And the on-ball creation, I think maybe the gap, in my opinion, is a little bit bigger than you feel. I mentioned 88th percentile pick-and-roll creation for Derrick White. Low volume, this isn't what he does, but even 87th percentile isolation creation. And of course, he's in a better situation. But for Mikal, it's 53rd percentile pick-and-roll creation, 20th percentile isolation. I would just bank on the more sensational pure shooter, the better ball handler, and the significantly better playmaker. That, to me, is Derrick White. I do think it is about the offensive gap. I get it. Mikal has scored more points per game, but so much of that is circumstantial. I trust Derrick White more to create high-quality clutch offense. I think that we've seen him do that in a way that I would not bank on Mikal doing. That was the last point on that. Please go with your number 5 now, because I had Bane at number 6. I have White at number 5. Know the beautiful thing about being a sports fan? There's only 2 days the whole year without a game. 2. With so much happening and so much action, that makes just about every day game day at DraftKings Sportsbook.
It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. It really couldn't be any easier or any simpler. Baseball, golf, UFC, there's something for every fan of every sport to bet on at DraftKings. And I know it's early, but football season will be here before you know it.
And if you're new to DraftKings, you gotta check this out. New customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Man, I wonder if this guy's even going to be on your list or what you consider him to be. I'm surprised. At number 5, I have Bradley Beal. And
wow.
Yeah, like I'm wondering, did you like leave him off your list? Is he not even here for you?
I don't have Bradley Beal on my list, man. Number 5. Wow.
Are you just that low on him, or do you not consider him to be a shooting guard?
Well, here's the thing. Devin Booker is like their point guard, but he's a shooting guard. So I have Devin Booker as a shooting guard, right? I presume that you do too. Do you have them both?
I have them both here, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I kind of got weird with Beal, but I'm fine leaving him off either way. I was sort of considering him not a shooting guard just because of Book, but they are obviously both shooting guards. But I think 5 is high for Beal regardless. I'm interested in what you have to say.
I showed some of my friends this list, and they had the exact same sentiment. I talked to one of my friends who's a Suns fan, and he goes, "Nah, man, you can just take Beal off the list." Like, even he didn't want Beal here.
Yeah.
I just think maybe the playoff run left a sour taste in people's mouth. And again, I'm looking at this in a vacuum, and I don't think this is the best winning situation for Beal. And I don't know what one would look like, right? I think he's definitely your 2 or your 3 offensively at this point. But you need guys behind him, and that's where I cut him a little bit of slack. Like, his job offensively is a lot easier for all these guys, for Book, Beal, and KD. They get to play alongside each other. They're both uber talented in isolation, off the catch. They're just not super complementary and seamless to one another. But, yeah, I still think Beal could be a contributor to a very good offense. 18, 4, and 5 on 51, 43, 83 split, 61% true shooting. He shot 70% in the restricted area. He shot 43% out of the mid-range. He shot 43% on step-backs and step-back threes, 39% on pull-up threes. I just think he's still a really good offensive player. Again, the Suns, we're not going to see it in Phoenix. We're not going to see the winning impact that any of these guys, I think, could have to a winning offense because their defense is going to suck so bad. It's not going to translate to wins. And, were the playoffs ugly? I can't deny that, right? Like the late game execution from these guys, the crumbling that we saw from Beal in the elimination game, it was all bad. Like I can't dress up how bad the playoffs were. It was really, really ugly. But this guy can still shoot. He can still score the basketball really efficiently. He's become a better playmaker over the years. Again, you're not going to see that here because Book's got the ball in his hands. I think he's taken a step back athletically. I think we've seen him lose some of his quickness, some of his dynamism off the dribble, but he's still a really great pure shooter and pure scorer. And in comparison to some of these other guys, they just couldn't do that. So I'm looking at this as there's enough of an offensive gap to me between Beal and the rest of these guys on the list that are below him to have him above it. I'm kind of shocked that he's not on your list and you didn't consider him, man. Why do you think Beal should be omitted from the list?
I am shocked, Logan. I will counter your shocked with an I am shocked that you have him above the 3 guys who we just discussed. Once you get to that 8 range, it's like Zach LaVine, CJ McCollum, Bradley Beal. To me, although they obviously have differences as basketball players, they're all sort of flip sides of the same coin, right? You question how they're going to compete defensively. You know that you're going to get pretty average playmaking. You know that none of them are necessarily going to get the highest shot quality for themselves. They're really, really skilled offensive basketball players, but how much are they going to contribute to winning? That's the question with all of them. With the dudes who we were just talking about, though, if I were starting a team from scratch, there is no question that I would take Derrick White. There's no question that I would take Mikal Bridges over Bradley Beal. I just do not think the offensive gap is big enough. And I think that finding like the ideal fit for Beal at this stage, although it is weird in Phoenix, because you have 3 dudes who have some similar strengths, some similar limitations. 3 dudes who are all tough shot makers, who are all decent playmakers, but neither of them are lead ball handlers, table setters. They all can play away from the ball, but it's not where any of them are at their absolute best. They're all limited in terms of rim pressuring. No doubt this is a funky, weird fit for Bradley Beal, but I wouldn't want him to be like my number 2 and my perimeter number 1 on any offense and be confident in that. Like, honestly, I think you have more upside with the Zach LaVine. I think the volume 3-point shooting from LaVine, the athleticism, the potential that at least maybe he could tap into defensively. I think in some ways the decision-making from ZJ, the competitiveness defensively would put him past a Bradley Beal in terms of the level that they were at this past season. And Beal did really struggle in the playoffs. He got swallowed up by superior athletes. He got swallowed up by that ball pressure. And it was ugly, man. He was turning the ball over. His shot quality was not high. I just think at this stage, given that he isn't the same athlete, although he's still quick, but he's not pressuring the rim consistently, there's just guys who clearly surpass him with their two-way impact, with their playmaking. Him at 5 is crazy to me, man. Over Derrick White in particular, I just disagree with that.
Again, man, it's like the winning impact versus you say start a team, and it's like, damn, man. I don't know. I was looking at it as also, I don't know. I guess you're right. Like, you're not going to win a ton of games if Bradley Beal was your number 1. I just don't think Derrick White or Mikal Bridges or
no. Of course not. But none of these guys are number 1s. Now we're talking about like how good are they as your third best player, and I think that Derrick White is significantly better in that role. I think Mikal Bridges is significantly better in that role than Beal. I mean, the offensive gap, especially in volume. I mean, the volume and efficiency between Derrick White and Bradley Beal, it's almost identical this past year. And then one of them is lapping the other defensively, is doing all of the little winning things that don't show up, while the other guy is doing none of those things.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. He can still score the basketball. I think the scoring aspect is still large between these guys.
I don't think it's nearly as large as you're letting on, man. Again, the efficiency numbers with Derrick White on ball are crazy. How good he's been in the clutch. He's been fantastic there. One dude is playing a role at an extremely high level and still giving you volume and super efficient offensive production. I mean, he scored more points per game than Bradley Beal in this playoff run. More efficiently.
Yeah,
and averaged more assists.
Bradley Beal also played, 4 games?
Well, yeah. And you know what? He got dogged in those 4 games.
He did get dogged. This is interesting. I don't know. I think you're really low on. I think you're really low on Beal. I'm just shocked he didn't make the list. I'm really surprised, man.
By the way, I lied. Derrick White didn't actually average more assists. It was 4.5 to 4.1 in Beal's
Yeah,
favor.
take that, buddy.
Yeah. But the raw production, between scoring and playmaking was identical. And Derrick White was more efficient. And Derrick White was leagues better as a defender. Again, like once you get into the sort of 8 range here, okay, that's fine if you want to take Bradley Beal at this point. I mean, obviously, he's still an effective drive and kick creator. He's still a really skilled shot maker. But he doesn't create a lot of easy shots for himself. I mean, he's not getting to the rim enough. He's not getting to the line enough. He's not a high enough level playmaker. I mean, he barely gets to the line, man. He took 2.5 free throws a game this year. And he's still playing in a pretty good offensive situation. Like, maybe not where he should thrive in terms of volume, but in terms of shot quality, having 2 other stars alongside him like that. And when he faced the length and athleticism of that Minnesota defense, man, I mean, again, they just destroyed him.
I'm not going to hold that to. I mean, yeah, they also destroyed Jamal Murray. Like, they destroyed a lot of guys. I mean, Minnesota's just got that kind of personnel that can disrupt, not super athletic guards. I get it. I don't know. I just feel like.
But it's like Logan. Jamal is his team's perimeter number 1. Bradley Beal is his team's perimeter number 3. There's a different level of burden there. And Jamal's also hurt.
And I feel like, I just feel like Beal's raw numbers would be better, and I feel like he'd be more impactful in a situation where he could have the ball in his hands a little more. I'm not saying he's hindered by Book. Book and KD create great shots for him, right? Because they take a lot of attention, but I don't know. I want to see Beal in a higher volume, like ball handling role in a different spot.
Well, that's what we've seen. That's what we've seen in Washington, and the results are.
I mean, and that was
not so good.
Yeah, I mean that's like that team sucks.
What separates him from Zach LaVine?
I think Beal's a better shooter. Just pure touch.
A better pure shooter? I don't agree with that.
LaVine's a good shooter, but
LaVine is a great shooter, dude. I mean, he's certainly going to shoot with more volume from beyond the arc, and he's consistently up at 40%. Like, this was a down year. He only played 25 games. And at his height, again, off movement, like, I think he's taking more threes, he's taking tougher threes, and he's still hitting them with, over the course of his career, the same or even slightly better efficiency.
That's an interesting aspect. The athletic gap is pretty significant between that and a guy like Beal at this point too, which actually is logically inconsistent with one of the arguments I'm going to make for a guy higher on this list.
Beal's a better playmaker, but it's like not by that much.
I don't know, man. I feel like you're just really low on Beal. Like I know Beal isn't what he once was.
Well, look, again, I sort of wasn't counting him because I didn't want to have two Suns shooting guards on this list. So I would have to think harder about like the specifics of. But no, I do think I would take Zach LaVine over Bradley Beal. I do, and I think that anything above number 8 for him is just too high for me. But let's move on. I think we've discussed this thoroughly. Who is in your 4 spot, Logan?
At number 4, I have Kyrie Irving. I think this is probably about as high as I can go with Kyrie. There's a definitively stamped top 3 to me. And Kyrie's just outside of that. This season, 26-5-5 on 50, 41, 91 split, 61% true shooting. This was some of the best basketball Kyrie has played, man, in terms of what he did defensively. Like, he was a really high-impact defender in these playoffs. Really good complimentary number 2. The reason he can't be higher, and I'm realizing the irony of this as we just discussed Beal, does not create the downhill pressure or generate free throws at the level of any of the guys above him. And every shot is going to be a little bit tougher for Kyrie because of his athletic and size limitations in comparison to some of these other guys. He's just a smaller guard, right? Kyrie is one of the most pound-for-pound skilled basketball players of all time. Like, when we were talking about those kind of guys, like Allen Iverson, Steph Curry, Kyrie Irving, I think those are like 3 of the just most skilled small guards of all time. But at this point, Kyrie's...
Brunson.
Yeah, for sure. Every shot is going to be just tougher for him because he's a little bit smaller. And Kyrie can get hot, but in this playoff run, you see the good with the bad. Like, it kind of felt like that with Kyrie. As much of the torrential scoring outputs that we got from him, we also got some stinkers. And it's just a reality of life as a tough shot maker in the NBA, man. You're going to get to those looks. Is your shot going in or isn't? And in comparison to some of these other guys, I just feel like they generate higher shot quality. They get to easier looks. They're better playmakers, or they can be better playmakers because of their athletic advantages. And that's why he can't climb higher. But Kyrie is a damn good number 2 at this point. Mm-hmm. Everybody else above him can be your offensive number 1. And I'm confident as an offensive number 1. At this point in Kyrie's career, I just feel like he's definitively a number 2. But he's a great basketball player, but I can't put him anywhere higher than this.
Agreed. I think that Kyrie is undeniably at number 4. I would be hard-pressed to have him any higher or hard-pressed to have him any lower. He is simply in a separate tier than everybody below him offensively, right? I mean, just the brilliance as a shot maker, 26 a night on 61% true shooting this past year, 50% from the mid-range, 41% from 3. And his versatility offensively is incredible. Like, the excellence both on and off ball, 79th percentile pick and roll ball handler, 76th percentile isolation scorer, and a 95th percentile spot up player. He has good feel everywhere. Like, just incredibly smart in terms of how he attacks as a scorer. A dude who has such a deep bag of counters, who is so versatile as a shot maker and finisher, the touch finishing with the right and left hand, both. Obviously one of the best ball handlers that we've ever seen. And his quickness can still be a problem. He's not getting to the rim at a high volume, but his quickness can be a problem for people, getting him into the lane, getting at least to that floater range. His clutch shot making is also phenomenal. He's been very malleable playing alongside Luka. I think he did a phenomenal job there this year. And his defensive effort was some of the best that we've seen. But his limitations, I mean, you hit on it. You don't get easy offense with Kyrie. You don't get the rim attempts. You don't get the free throws. The finishes in the paint are tough, lefty running floaters over the rim protector. And it's dazzling. It's jaw-dropping. It's not easy. And it's efficient because he's so great at it, but it's not as efficient as what you can get from some of these other guys. And it doesn't put the same level of downhill stress creating openings for other guys as a couple of the players who are above him. His size is a limitation on both sides of the ball. Offensively for the reasons that we just discussed, and defensively because as good as his hands may be and his instincts, like, you can just attack the guy. He was attacked quite a bit in that Boston series. Luka was the dude who everybody keyed in on. Luka was brutal, but Kyrie also just did not have the ability to compete in a matchup like that, right? The bigger wings could bully him physically. They could get by him, or the Celtics were very cerebral about when the Mavs were trying to hide Kyrie in the corner, taking advantage then of the fact that he was operating as the low man. Like, if you could bring the big out into space because they were switching everything, now you have him in a compromised position. There's just too many limitations defensively because of his size and athletic shortcomings at this stage in his career. And although I thought we got some good playmaking from him, especially in that OKC series where it's like, yeah, he's consistently getting blitzed and doubled, but he was getting the ball out. He was making good reads. He was selfless. Overall, though, he's just solid. And he can't be a number one like any of the dudes above him. It's not even really close because of the physical difference. And he's just less consistent as a scorer. That's what happens when your shot diet is all pull-up jumpers. No matter how good you are, there's going to be volatility there. You saw that in the finals. I mean, you saw that throughout the playoffs. Sometimes it was just Kyrie didn't want to assert himself at the volume necessary, but like, you're talking about multiple single-digit scoring games. The OKC series is sort of an anomaly because he was getting so much attention. But in the finals, man, multiple clunkers. In the Minnesota series, he has a rough clunker. Just couldn't carry an offense like the dudes above him at this stage. That's why I think he has to be number 4. Who is number 3, Logan?
If you had asked me this question a year ago, this guy very well could have been number 1. At number 3, I have Devin Booker. And
ooh,
this was tough. I really debated between him and Donovan Mitchell, and that was a tough decision. And this is one that we've had a multitude of times over the past 3 seasons. Book has grown in a lot of ways over the past couple of seasons, man. As a playmaker, as a lead ball handler, like he's made real growth there. This last season, 27 points, 5 boards, 7 assists on 49, 36, 89 split, 61% true shooting. You talk about being reliant on pull-up jumpers. D-Book averaged 11.5 pull-up points per game. That was second in all of the NBA last season. My distinction between him and Donovan Mitchell is I probably prefer Devin Booker purely as a playmaker, but I prefer Mitchell's athletic advantages and his ability to barrage teams with three-pointers. I think D-Book's limited three-point volume hinders him a little bit in terms of his ceiling, right? He is so reliant on the mid-range that, you know, I just don't think he's as prone to having scoring explosions like Donovan Mitchell can. And I think Donovan Mitchell's athletic advantages offset D-Book's playmaking advantages a little bit, right? The ability for Donovan Mitchell to just at will get downhill, put pressure on the rim, and generate good looks for his teammates. And that's one of my things about Donovan Mitchell. I would say this for him, but we're going to get right into it. I think we've really barely scratched the surface on how great Donovan Mitchell could be as an offensive engine. I want to see him as the centerpiece of a fully optimized offensive situation because Cleveland doesn't have a ton of floor spacing or a lot of guys that can just barrage teams with three-pointers. And I think some of the advantages that Donovan Mitchell creates as a downhill rim pressure kind of get negated because his teammates can't make these guys pay. And so that's why I would take Mitchell over Booker is the athletic gap, the rim pressuring, and the high volume of three-point attempts where Mitchell can get hot and, you know, just completely sink teams in individual games. I've had a lot of tough decisions on this list. By far the toughest was picking between Book and Mitchell, but I'm gonna side with Donovan Mitchell, and so Booker's at 3, Mitchell is at 2 for me.
The eternal debate rages on, Logan, and it is as good right now as it has ever been. I remain on the Devin Booker side of this, but I think that you hit on all of the key points in Donovan Mitchell's favor. There is an absurdly explosive scoring ceiling with this guy, because he is a ridiculous ball handler. He's an explosive athlete. He has some of the best paint footwork and body control in the league. I mean, the spins in the paint, the Euros in the paint. Like, it's just incredible what he can do as a finisher down there. He can completely dominate games in that respect. I mean, when he dropped 50 on Orlando, I think he had 36 points in the paint in that game. Wasn't it the most that we'd seen by a guard in the playoffs in like almost 20 years? I want to say since Kobe. It was an insane performance, and he's a dynamic pull-up shooter from beyond the arc. 35% this regular season, 43% in these playoffs. It was an outstanding postseason showing from him, putting up 35-5 on better than 58% true shooting in just brutal circumstances. It was really impressive. I do think that Book still has the advantage, though, to me, for a couple reasons. He's so insane as a shot maker that we can talk about pull-up reliance, but at his size, you are getting, first of all, a different floor than like a Kyrie because he's going to be significantly better as a foul drawer. He's never operating at the sort of physical disadvantages that Kyrie is against like way bigger, way more athletic defenders. And Book can just get himself a good shot in any way, man. Playing out of the post, right? He is highly skilled. He is a really good off-ball guard. And then he's a 94th percentile pick and roll creator, 80th percentile isolation scorer, 70th percentile post-up scorer. Like, at that size, being that sort of out of this world jump shooter is such a weapon. And you can talk about Donovan Mitchell's explosive scoring ceiling. We've seen that in the playoffs, but let's not act like Book didn't just 1 year ago give you 34 a night on 69% true shooting, like one of the best scoring runs from a guard lasting multiple rounds that we have ever seen in NBA playoff history. So they both have a couple limitations, right? For Book, it's the lack of dynamic athleticism, which I do think was an issue against Minnesota. Now, he was able to just explode in game 4 of that series, and it ends up being that his bottom line numbers don't even look that bad. And that was an amazing performance against that defense. But the first 3 games were really rough. And he was also really affected by the ball pressure, the length of that Minnesota defense. So you don't have that sort of high-end athleticism with him, and you don't have elite playmaking. Mitchell's downsides to me are, how does he fit with another guard who needs the ball in their hands a lot? Because I think Devin Booker is much more seamless there because of his versatility, because of how smart he is, how effective he is playing away from the ball. And Booker is more consistent to me in every way, which is interesting because oftentimes it's like the guys who are the better athletes who can get downhill more, that provides the higher floor. It's different with these two, though, because Booker is so consistently great as a shot maker. And Donovan Mitchell is such a high-volume pull-up three-point shooter, and he's just simply not the level of jump shooter that Devin Booker is, right? So there is more volatility. We saw back-to-back postseasons where Donovan Mitchell was great as a three-point shooter in 2020 and 2021. Insane. And that was when it was like, this dude is one of the biggest playoff risers we've seen. Then he was absolutely brutal in back-to-back postseasons. And it became, Donovan Mitchell isn't a guy who you can trust in the playoffs. Like, it's funny how quickly things changed, but that is the reality of some of the volatility with his play style, with that sort of volume three-point shooting. And also, that makes Booker the more consistent scorer. When it comes to playmaking, I actually think that you get higher highs with Donovan Mitchell because of how he pressures the paint. He just has some of these incredible advanced reads, like what he can do as a live dribble passer, the velocity that he can put on some of these kickouts, some of these laydown passes, like really impressive stuff. But Booker is more consistent there as well. Mitchell will have the better highlight reel. Book is consistently going to average more assists. And you just have these stretches for Mitchell where it's tough pull-up three, not getting his teammates involved. It's more understandable in Cleveland, but it's still not ideal. And Book doesn't have that tendency. And I don't want to sell short what Book can do as your offensive number one, because I think that this is a pretty clear case. And we said this throughout the regular season. We had this exact conversation with our pal Tyler Hoop Venue. Mitchell is the more dynamic floor raiser, but your ceiling is higher with Devin Booker. He is much more malleable as a number 2, which I think is the ideal role for either one of these guys. And as your number 1, like, if it were just, hey, Book can only be a number 2, that'd be one thing. Then it would say, let's respect the dude who can do it at a high level as a number 1. You've been in the finals with Book as your number 1. He turned out back-to-back top 5 offenses. Like, his versatility, his shot making, his playmaking still works really well as a number 1. You just ideally want to have a little bit of ball handling alongside him as well. So I lean Book here. I prefer that ceiling raising.
A couple of things. One, I don't know if Donovan Mitchell works alongside another ball-dominant guard. I don't. I consider Mitchell to be more of a point guard at this point, and I don't. I think they should lean into it. Get him a two guard who can complement him and play defense. Two, the thing that I want to emphasize here is I don't even blame Mitchell for getting locked in Utah, in Cleveland, and icing out his teammates. If guys aren't hitting shots, like, you can see the frustration through the TV screen. Like, Mitchell's just, all right, man, screw it. I'm going to just do it myself. Like, if nobody wants to hit a shot. I really want to see Mitchell with a team that is centered around him. And Cleveland has the assets to make that happen. Trade Jarrett Allen. Go get a big wing who can shoot the ball. Trade Darius Garland. Go get, a big wing who can shoot the ball. Like, go get two of those guys, man, and let's ride. Like, I don't think Garland and Mitchell work together, and that's okay. Like, I think you're right. You make a great point. I think D-Book can complement another ball-dominant guard the way that Mitchell can't. But that's why I just don't think it works. Like, put the ball in Mitchell's hands every time. Like, let's just see what happens, and let's get him guys that work really well around him and complement what he does at a really high level. Like, I think Cleveland's offense has been so comically bad around him. Donovan Mitchell has gotten better from those two playoff runs. You talk about that volatility, Carson. That doesn't worry me the way it did with him in Utah. I think he has legitimately grown as a basketball player to where I don't have those concerns about him disappearing in a way he did in Utah.
But it was last year. Last year was really rough. This year was phenomenal, and I do want to give him credit. I mean, this was the most that he's ever gotten downhill in a postseason. Like I mentioned, that performance against Orlando, like that was incredible downhill pressure. I love to see that from Donovan Mitchell. 23% of his shots came inside of 3 feet in this run versus just like 16% last year. But he still takes a lot of pull-up threes. And like, he's not great at those shots. He's obviously good at them, but it's not uber efficient offense.
Yeah, I just attribute more of that to the lack of talent offensively in Cleveland. And I think if you put spacing around him, if you put shooters around him, you could really see him get maximized, and I think you could watch him lead out one of the best offenses in basketball. I think Mitchell has that kind of ceiling as an offensive engine, and I just want to see it realized, before the fall-off comes. And I'm just afraid that we're never going to see that. I think that he can be a really damn good number one and a really damn good offensive engine, and I want to see it happen. It's an interesting debate, though, man. I don't think there's a wrong answer. Like, I think both of these guys are really damn good. I prefer the athletic gap. I prefer the rim pressure, the downhill element, and I prefer the three-point shooting ceiling. But, again, I don't think you can go wrong. But I think Devin Booker has been in more conducive winning situations than Donovan Mitchell has. And I just want to see him in a better situation. I want to see Cleveland make some moves where they go all in on him as the number one lead superstar.
And to give props to what he did as a floor raiser during the stretch of the year where they were down Darius Garland and they were down Evan Mobley for a lot of it as well. But he led the Cavs to go 14-5 without Garland on the floor. Like, when you just put shooting, when you put athletes alongside him, not even great shooting, like, he was able to make that offense more effective than it often is when they have all of their quote-unquote best players on the floor. I just think there's more malleability with Book. The gap in terms of how they fare as floor raisers isn't big enough to offset the gap in ceiling raising, which I do think is pretty clear. But I think that they are close. I think that this conversation to me is closer than it would have been at the start of this past year. Part of that is they sort of had inverse playoff runs. Donovan Mitchell was really good. You saw all of the upside of his play style. Devin Booker struggled. You saw the downsides of his play style in a really, really tough matchup. But at number one, Logan, we're both going to agree on this. Who do you have?
It's the darling baby boy, Anthony Edwards, man.
Yes.
Oh,
Captain
I love
Charisma.
Anthony. I love Anthony Edwards, man. This season, 26 points, 5 boards, 5 assists on 46, 36, 84 splits. A true shooting percentage of 58. And the big thing about this playoff run was the brilliance that we saw him in just shooting the basketball. In the playoff, or excuse me, this is a regular season number. He averaged 11 pull-up points per game. In the playoffs, though, Carson, we saw a leap of him shooting 12% higher. These are all in comparative to his regular season numbers. 12% higher out of the mid-range, 47%. 12% higher on step-backs, 44%. 7% higher on pull-up jumpers, and 5% higher on pull-up threes. And that's what I'm really excited about for this upcoming season. If he can carry any of that over into this next season, we could be in store for an Anthony Edwards breakout season. I mean, in the playoffs, he was giving you 28 points per game and 7 assists on 60% true shooting, 40% from behind the arc. If we see a tangible and consistent jump shooting leap from Anthony Edwards in pull-ups and threes, I mean, you're just looking at one of the best players in all of basketball, point blank, period. I mean, he is effectively unstoppable in some situations. If you don't have a lead guard who can hold him, he can just get to the rim at will, where he shot 69% in the restricted area. If you couple that with elite pull-up jump shooting, again, man, you were just looking at one of the best offensive engines, one of the best offensive players in basketball. And not only that, I'm encouraged by what we saw from him playmaking. Now, I think this is an area where Anthony Edwards can improve even more. You see some of the downsides in the playoff run, but dealing with double teams, making kicks to the weak side corner on drives. Again, I think he needs to work a little bit on the passing vision. You see it on the tape sometimes where he just misses easy reads, but he's also great at making some really hard reads. And so that's what I'm looking for in this season, Carson. I already think he's number one. I think the ability to get downhill is unrivaled by any player in basketball today. If we can see a tangible leap in playmaking, in pull-up jump shooting, and jump shooting overall, again, man, you're just looking at one of the most unguardable players in all of basketball. And I don't think he's done. I think you were seeing a guy that is just on an upward trajectory right now. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think Anthony Edwards has the potential to be maybe the best player in basketball one day. It's going to be damn hard with the Luka Doncic's of the world, with the Jokic's of the world, with the Wembys of the world. But to me, Anthony Edwards has that kind of potential, and he's already the best shooting guard on planet Earth.
Yeah, I think that Ant has pretty clearly claimed this throne. It was a really, really impressive playoff run from him, and didn't end on the highest note against the Dallas defense that was built to challenge him in many ways, right? That was going to force him to make those skip passes that had awesome rim protection, so he couldn't find nearly the same success finishing around the rim that he did against Denver. It was a real challenge, and he felt that challenge, and he didn't play all that well in the Dallas series, and that was a factor that cost him. I mean, especially early in that series, it was rough, but he just has otherworldly athleticism in every way, right? Explosiveness, downhill in terms of quickness, vertical pop around the rim, strength. The finishing is insane. The degree of difficulty that he can survive as a finisher is outstanding. And in the playoffs specifically, the ability to leverage his downhill threat and create these high-quality pull-up jumpers that he can make efficiently, it's just game-breaking. I mean, he was 47% from mid-range, 38% on pull-up threes in this playoff run. That is huge. And his defensive impact also clearly surpasses anybody else who we're talking about in this range. Book and Donovan Mitchell, when they're both engaged, they're fine defensive players. They're solid. Ant has the ability to be a real high-level impact defender, and particularly on ball. I mean, he is just awesome, right? He's strong as hell. He's quick. He's super long, and he is competitive on ball. Now, he does have some issues in terms of his off-ball attentiveness, but still, he is clearly head and shoulders above both Book and Mitchell. And offensively, I do love the consistent rim pressure that you get from him. Now, you do have questions about the consistency of the pull-up shooting, because although I like a lot of those looks that he gets in the playoffs, man, and he gets in a rhythm and you think those are going to fall, like the gap between him being a 44% pull-up shooter in terms of effective field goal percentage in the regular season to 53% in the playoffs is massive, because he takes those shots at a high volume. He's going from basically the least efficient in the regular season to the equivalent of one of the most efficient in the playoffs. That changes who he is. And if that doesn't happen next year, well, then maybe you're looking at something closer to regular season Ant, who is certainly a top 15 player, but is he the sort of top 8, top 10 player who it feels like he basically stamped himself as in this playoff run? Well, maybe not, because then it's like you're getting pretty average scoring efficiency. You are getting pretty average playmaking. He does still have his limitations as a touch scorer, right? He just completely lacks any sort of floater game. He relies on the mid-range shot making to supplement that. That would really be the only concern for me with Ant, but he's consistently risen in the playoffs to a different level. He's consistently gotten better as a pull-up shooter. And no, it's not a huge sample size, but it's 3 different runs where that has been the case. His athletic imposition on the game, his strength in these physical playoff environments against high-level defenses is extremely valuable, and I would bank on that more than anything that you're getting from Book and Mitchell. And obviously, he does have the most room for growth, dialing in defensively, continuing to grow as a playmaker, where, yeah, there was encouraging stuff. I still think he's the weakest of these 3 guys, but overall in this playoff run, I would say he probably fared better than I expected as a playmaker. And that was his first real go at it as this level of a basketball player. It was pretty darn impressive overall. So I think Ant is stamped as number 1 on this list. He is able to carry a team in really suboptimal circumstances offensively. Like, that was a huge strength for them through the first 2 rounds. Their offense was excellent, especially against the Suns. They destroyed them because it's really, really hard to have somebody who can stay in front of Ant. It's really, really hard to have rim protectors who can legitimately deter and challenge him. And when the pull-up jumper's falling as well, like, good night, man. It's over. You're cooked.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that this is the first time that we've really seen Ant on this stage, and he flourished. And the fact that there's still room for improvement is why I'm most encouraged with Ant. Is like there are still so many things that like I think he can get better at. Like, and there's another thing about the pull-up jump shooting too. There are times where I feel like Ant would settle a little too much for that jumper, and I think he can get better at that. Right? You talk about how consistently great he was pressuring the rim. I think he can even get better because there are lulls in the game where he's just not getting downhill. He's settling for it. Also, another component that I think kicks him up a notch is, though, when that pull-up 3 is falling, like Ant is one of those dudes who can get into a rhythm and barrage you with a couple of those too. But like I said, man, I think we are in store for continued ascension from Anthony Edwards. I think he's going to continue to get better. I think he is going to break out even more. And I hope that the loss to Dallas, a little bit of a fire inside Anthony Edwards, and wants him to come back and kick even more ass, man. That guy's got the mentality of a killer. He's got the ability of a killer. I think he's the next big thing, man, and I think he's going to continue to get better, man. I'm so excited for Ant next season and to see how high he can climb into these top 10 and top 5 conversations and where he's going to be at the end of next season. But right now, stamped. I think it's going to be really hard to dethrone him as the number 1 shooting guard in the league.
Agreed. That is going to be a very difficult challenge for whoever comes next. Any final thoughts, Logan, as we wrap this puppy up?
One final thing. I asked this question on the Point Guards episode. I'm going to ask it again. Who do you think is most likely to leap onto this list? Who do you think is most likely to drop off of this list?
So joining, it's not even a question. It's Jalen Green. He just so clearly has the most ability of anybody who is not on this list. And he's still very young. Most likely to drop off? I mean, I would probably say it's CJ in my 10 spot. I could just see him having another rough playoff run maybe, and then it's like, okay, bye-bye birdie. But any of the guys in my bottom 3, like none of them are super safe. I don't know. If Caruso regressed as a three-point shooter, then that would not make him as valuable an offensive player. If LaVine continues to toil away in Chicago, or if he goes somewhere else and doesn't change his approach to the game, you know, he could get dropped off of this list. So it's one of those 3 guys for dropping off, but it's definitely Jalen Green for joining.
For joining, I think I agree with Jalen Green. And unfortunately, I've had enough time to think about this and reflect on it. Definitely, the guy who's probably likely enough to drop off my list is Bradley Beal.
Let's go!
I'm mad. I think I made a mistake. I'm going to stick to my guns.
The damn button.
I already made the case.
Okay.
I've had a lot of time to reflect on that. He's definitely got to be the highest candidate, though. I mean, with his age, with his limited two-way value, it's probably him or LaVine, or unless Dejounte in New Orleans is an absolute disaster. But I really don't see how that could be like a monumental failing. It probably is Beal, man. I'm really rethinking that one as we are wrapping this up.
Hey, listen, man. Life is fluid. We don't have all the answers. We listen, we sit our white asses down, we listen, and we learn, and we grow. And that's maybe what happened today. Sounds like you're sticking to your guns. Maybe you're being stubborn. Maybe you should be more open-minded. Drop Bradley Beal out of that top 5. Drop him to the 8th spot. See how it feels. Just look at that list. Look at that list with Derrick White, Mikal.
Are we okay with that? Are we okay with that? Is that even legal?
No, it's not.
Legal. I don't think I'm legally allowed to do that.
It's not legal. You have to post the graphic, and everybody's going to say, "What the fuck? Why is Bradley Beal at number 5 in the year of our Lord 2024?" And you're going to say,
"That's called rage bait, folks. That's called rage bait. That's called engagement farming."
We're gonna go. Well, yeah, you guys haven't even seen all the AI accounts that we're running on the side. You guys have no idea about all the Subway Surfer Rogan accounts that we have going on. We mine those clips for about 12 hours a day, and it makes us $400,000 a month. This is just engagement bait on the side. This is the light work stuff. Now Logan's mewing.
Free game. No, I'm saying we're giving out free game right now, man. Keep it on the low.
Nah, man. I got to put them on. We can all be millionaires off of posting clips from Coco Melon. That's the wave. All right, guys. For now, though, we'll stick with this. We'll stick with talking sports. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, there's plenty more Nerd Sesh content. We've got the top 10 point guards list out already. More of these positional top 10s coming over the next couple weeks. We have a bunch of fun trivia episodes that have come out already, will continue to come out. Check out all of those on our YouTube channel. Subscribe if you want to. And you can listen to all of our shows across all audio platforms. You can also check us out across social, TikTok, Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh. We have a bunch of fun trivia content there, some clips from the show. Go follow us across those places. And you can check out our merch at thevolume.com. You can also join our Discord to chat with the fellas. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.